This is a review of these flare sticks from flarestick.com. I've had these for about 2 years and I wanted to do a breakdown on how we use them, why we use them, and whether you should buy them for quite a while now. They've been out on a lot of shoots, mostly, I have to say, on the fashion side of things, although occasionally we have tried them on other things. When I bought them, they only had the glass stems. Almost immediately after buying them, they came out with a steel stem version, which actually has a screw fastening, so you can screw it onto a standard quarter 20, I believe, which in some respects would make them more usable, because I'm always afraid that we're going to snap these glass stems. Having said that, I have actually used the stems, because they are glass, you can use them to distort your image as well, and they give some quite nice effects, and I wouldn't be able to do the same thing if I had the steel ones, so perhaps actually it works better like this. To attach them to the cameras, I'm using these Manfrotto 244 arms, micro arms, and the Pico clamp. The Pico clamp's the only one that I found which actually accommodates the width of the stem there. Just put that in, crank that down onto the stem. And then the way that I would use it is have it screwed into the front of the rail block on my follow focus, and that allows me to position it where I want in front of the lens, lock it off, have it in a position, and then remove it really easily without having to worry about dropping it, because it's all fastened and it's just going to swing. So that's really cool. On top of that, you can just loosen it and move it around if you want a slightly more mobile effect with it. But I'd recommend something like that, because otherwise you do run the risk, perhaps, of dropping it when you're using them on shoots. You can obviously twist them if you have them in your hand, so if you are confident that you're not going to drop it, then that's a way of working around it. And you could put them on a stand and move in and out of it, so it's not like you're passing behind something. That's another thing that you can do, which is kind of valid. So what is it that they do? Well, basically they give you a slightly hazy, flary look to your image, and depending on how far you push it in, it's going to distort more and more of your image till it's completely obscured by the whole diameter of the thing. So I've got 5 of them just here. That's quite an investment. They're not cheap. They come in all different shapes and sizes. They have different facets on the glass, which will give you different effects. But truth be told, I actually only really use this one. This is my favorite. It's not too big, it's not too small, it's easy to manipulate, it's got a flat edge, so it's actually quite wide, which means that you can easily manipulate it onto the image circle of your lens, and you can turn it sideways and get a slightly different effect as well. In the majority of the examples, this is the flare stick you are going to be seeing. I used it on this shoot, I used it on most of the other fashion shoots. It's just the one that I reach for because I know that I can get a certain look out of it, and it's the look that I like. The others do work, but I found that they're not quite as versatile as this particular model for me, and also the flares that I get tend to be a little bit more obvious. This is a little bit more subtle in my experience. It's probably best when you're looking at this if you just went out and bought one and see if you like the effect that's giving you, and then maybe if you're really digging it, then you can get some more of them and you could build up a collection of them. This is not the only way, of course, that you can manipulate your image. You could get just a plastic water bottle, a glass, a wine glass, some cut glass, whatever it is, and just hold it in front of your lens. You could even get a knife or a fork or any number of different things. Just put it close to the lens, careful not to scratch your lens, and you can get some sort of out of focus interest. So you don't have to necessarily go out and invest lots of money in that kind of thing. And on certain shoots, reaching for a bottle and just creating this cool, weird, out of focus thing, you're gonna look like a rock star and everyone's gonna think, wow, yeah, he just grabbed this bottle and he made it look all cool. On other shoots, that's not an option. You need it to look professional, you need to look like you've really thought it out. And with these flare sticks, you can get a little carry case. It's all nice and it's hard with a soft inside, and you can unzip it. It says flare stick down the side, it's got a little carry handle. Open it up and you get this thing out. Having that mystique around it when you open up this little case and you have this crazy device, and you're then creating these looks that no one's seen before, and everyone thinks you're some kind of alchemist just crafting these crazy images. Now that whole pantomime is really just for effect. It's to push the image that you're an expert and you know what you're doing, and maybe you need that for certain shoots, maybe you don't. Is it worth the money to invest in this to have that? If you're just doing shoots for fun, maybe not. But when you are doing things where you need everything to look professional, having the mounting point for it, and knowing how it mounts and all the rest of it, and not fumbling around with bottles in front of expensive cameras and lenses, maybe that's more important. You will have to decide whether it's worth it for you or not. I like those options, but I will also use other things. You know, sometimes we'll be on a shoot and I want just a little bit of reflection, something in shot, something to pass behind. We'll just get a C-stand, just put a C-stand there and I can just pass behind the C-stand, or a combo stand if I want something a little bit wider to completely cut my image with a bit of reflection. And that's basically free. That's stuff that's on shoots already. So you have to look at this as a value proposition. Is the aesthetic that you're getting out of it worth it for you? Is the image that your clients are after compatible with this? Then it's worth it for you. Is the image that the clients have of you as a professional worth you having this little thing in a box versus you just being able to grab a bottle? Maybe. You're going to have to decide for yourself on whether this is something you want to try out, whether it's something you want to invest in. For my money, I probably wouldn't buy the set of 5. To be honest, most of the time when I've used any of the others, apart from that one that I really like, it's just been to use the stem in addition to the one that I really like, just to mess up another side of the image. I did it on some interviews for FameLab, where we just had little streaks coming across, and it was a little bit extreme visually, but they kind of give me free rein on that, and it has to be a little bit sciencey, a bit techie, and they just want it to look cool, so I thought, well, let's have some fun. Now, when you're looking at these, you might think, yeah, you can shine light through them, you can create all kind of crazy light effects, and I have done that. I did it with a ring, and it created this little twinkly, sort of sparkly effect on the paper around the ring, which was kind of nice, but it's not prismatic. Is prismatic a word? It doesn't split the light particularly, so you're just getting little spots of white light, basically. That's okay, but it takes quite a lot of light to do that. You can't just shine light through it and suddenly have like a disco ball effect. It just does not work like that. So where I've tried to use it on anything bigger than a ring, it really doesn't have any effect at all, unless you're right in close on, say, a person's eye and you wanted to twinkle it around. Yeah, but there are other ways of doing that. Just get a disco ball, shine a light into it. So I wouldn't say that they're worth it because you can use them for other things particularly as well. Something I want to talk about when you're doing this sort of stuff is how they actually interact with the lenses that you're using. Now, for the vast majority of the shoots, because I'm doing fashion, I am sitting on a 50 to a 75mm. That's my sweet spot for when I'm doing these fashion shoots. It's where I like things for my movement. I'm often on an easy rig, so I'm kind of moving, and if I go any longer than that, I can't really get the look and the movement that I like. F-stop wise, I'm sitting between a 3.5 and a 5.6, so I can get slightly out of focus background, but still have enough to play with and make sure that I'm nice and sharp. It's kind of the sweet spot of the lenses that I'm using, the Schneiders. So all of those things work quite well, actually, with the flare sticks. As soon as you go wider, it actually doesn't work as well. The way that they interact with the lenses is very much down to how deep your depth of field is. And when you go to the wider lenses, you more naturally have that deeper depth of field, and it feels more like someone's just holding some blob in front of the lens more than it does you having this kind of flary, hazy little pops of shape and light. So the wider I go, the less I like them. The more stopped down I go, the less I like them. And actually in the examples that I did just now, I'm in lockdown when I'm doing this, so obviously I'm limited on what I can film, so I just had a little tabletop set here with car, had the Ursa Pro just off to the side, and I was moving them in and out on a 50. Now obviously in this scenario, the focal point is far closer to the front element of the lens than it would be if I was filming a subject 10-15 feet away. And because of that, they do take on a slightly more obvious look. I don't like as much how they sit, and they don't do the things that I'm used to seeing them do in that particular scenario. So you do have to consider when you're using these, or when you're doing anything like this, really. I mean, it's kind of obvious, you know this. If you're filming someone far away and you're focused on them, anything that's close to the lens is going to be out of focus, and it's going to kind of blur out and get bigger. Bigger and more spread out is what you'll get. So anything you put in front of the lens is going to be less obvious. It's going to be able to completely occlude the lens much quicker because you just whip it across and it doesn't have to cover so much image, if you like. But I think that because of all of those things, I can't really recommend using them on a wider lens. The only thing that I think I do like them for on a wider lens is not using them directly and just using them to bounce light into the lens to create flares in the lens that are moving. So it's a very different application, and you have to sort of work differently at that point to get light through the thing into the lens. So maybe you have a tiny little Lumimuse panel, or maybe you're bouncing a little bit of light in with a mirror or something, or maybe you're trying to kick a little bit of sunlight into it. But it's a different proposition, completely different way of working with it. And at that point, you might legitimately ask yourself, why am I doing this with this weird bit of glass? Why not just use something reflective like a pocket mirror in a compact, or a knife, or anything that you can just reflect a bit of light into the lens with? It would be much more efficient to do it that way, I think. Although you wouldn't get the same dancing effect that you can with these just by giving them a little twist. It's all an organic process, and if it's worth it, then it's worth it. But you might find yourself trying to find a use for them where actually there isn't a use and you could do it in a more efficient way. This all sits in the context of physical filtration versus doing some kind of filtration or effect in post. And it's something that I'm going to be looking at in a lot more detail with actual physical filters for matte boxes, because now that we can do a lot of softening, a lot of hazing, misting effects in post, people are asking why they should use something like a Pro Mist or Glimmer Glass or any of those physical filters when they go out and shoot. Those are very expensive. To get the best out of them, you have to have lots of different grades so that you can choose the right level of filtration for the scene that you're shooting. And knowing what you're actually doing with them can be a bit of a minefield if you don't have that experience of trying all of those different types of filtration, knowing what's going to work for your scene, knowing what you like the look of, and knowing how it's going to impact things when you come to do the grade is probably out of most people's realm of expertise. I'm going to be doing a very big shootout with lots of different kinds of filtration, looking at how they work in different scenes, and looking at why I think it's worth doing that versus doing the post-filtration. There are famous cinematographers who are well known for not using any physical filtration at all. Roger Deakins springs to mind. And for them, it works. They're just catching everything clean with their lens and then doing everything that they need to do with light and atmosphere and all of those things that you can do prior to the light hitting the lens to create the look that you want. Where other cinematographers really rely on being able to use what those filters give them to create a certain aesthetic. This breakdown, when I get to it, and why on some levels Roger Deakins absolutely right, and others you shouldn't necessarily take what Roger Deakins suggests at face value for you, because you're on a lower budget than him. You don't have access to the crew he has. You don't have access to the kind of setups that he's going to be doing, and you don't have access to the lenses that he has access to. So using the filtration to get around the limitations of the things that you're going to find on your sets could actually be valid. And then when you move up and you're doing the huge films and you've got access to all these other things, maybe you don't need to use the filtration so much because you can create those looks that you're after physically in real life. It's a sliding scale. There are truths on either side of everything here. And it's really a case of working out what's going to be best for you, for your clients, for the kind of shoot that you do, and for the way that you want to work, your workflow. These feed into that. They are physical filtration. You can do things like this in post. You can add flares. You can add all kinds of little kicks and haze, but you don't get the same organic feedback. You can't look at something on set and say, oh yeah, the light's coming in like that, and I can do this, and I can get the model to stand in this position. If you don't see how that works when you're there, when you get back to the edit, you don't have the option of going back and changing any of it. So having that physical feedback loop, for me, actually works really well, and it makes me work in a very particular way when I'm using them. And that's nice because it creates limitations, it creates a direction, and baking that look in hard at the camera means I don't procrastinate so much about what I do in the grade. There are still projects where I shoot clean and get everything really pristine and then add things in post, but for those shoots where I don't do that, I really like messing things up a little bit so that I have a really clear direction and then I just got to work with it. That is a double-edged sword if you're working with a client and you do this and you do it too much and you get to the grade and they're sitting there and they say, can we take off all those flares and haze? And you go, no, we can't. I shot that with a little bit of glass in front of the lens, and they're like, well, I don't like them. So at that point, if they've invested tons of money in that shoot, if it's delivered next week and there's no time to change anything, you're fucked. You have just messed up everything because you wanted to use a flare stick. So knowing when to use them, knowing the aesthetic you're going for, and laying that out very early on if you're on a client shoot is incredibly important. You don't want to find yourself in the position of saying to them, I waved a little piece of glass in front of the lens and now that £50,000 shoot that you wanted to do doesn't work for the client and we can't do anything about it. That would be terrible. Very rare that I'm actually using these on commercial ads and things unless there's a really specific case for using them, and that's laid out early on with storyboards. And I'll be very clear, if we're doing that, I'll say, we're committing to this. Look, you understand we can't change this. If we want to change it, we can't. There's nothing we can do. Often we won't have time to do 2 lots of shots, so I will say it is this or this. If we like this look, we go with it and we commit to it. If we don't like it, we shoot it clean and we understand that what we do in post might not have this aesthetic. And as long as you're clear, you should be fine. Having said all that, if I was offered all my money back for these and they said, we'll take them back, we'll just give you all your money back, we'll double it, we'll triple it, we'll just give you all that money, but it erases all the shoots that you've done with them, so all of those shoots suddenly don't have these lens flare effects on and they just go back to plain thing, would not do it. Because the look of these shoots that I've done is absolutely fundamental to the way that I've edited them, the way that they feel, and I think that actually they would not work as well if it wasn't for those flare sticks. So that's a very conflicted opinion. On the one hand, I would not be without them. On the other hand, I don't know if they're worth the money for most people to actually go out and invest in them.